So I'm delighted to be joined on this video podcast by WIll Rainey. Will trained as an actuary, joined Towers Watson, ending up as head of investment strategy in Asia, based in Hong Kong. He now runs Blue Tree Savings, which aims to help parents educate their kids about money. And he's just published a book, Grandpa's Fortune Fables, which are fun stories to teach kids about money. Will, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. What I'd like to know is what motivated you to move from a corporate role, starting as an actuary, to running your own business? I mean, the two things are diametrically opposed. And why is teaching kids about money important to you?
Yeah, no, well, thank you for having me on this video podcast. So my background was that, yes, as you say, I was in Hong Kong, and I think it was about 2017. I was just having a conversation with someone about my two young daughters, and they said to me, enjoy this time with them, they only grow up once, which is a very obvious statement, but I don't know, it just had a really big impact on me. And I was like, yeah, no, you're right, they do only grow up once and they're growing up so fast. So I said to my wife, let's take some time off full-time corporate work to spend more time with the kids. And so that's what we did. So in 2019, so we put a plan into place. 2019, left Hong Kong. We're now in Vietnam, so this is where I'm speaking to you today, to spend more time with my kids. And whilst my kids are at school, I wanted to start something. I wanted to be doing something when they're at school. I wanted to be making a bit of impact. So I kind of went through what would be the best kind of bit that I could add value. And what I noticed was when I left Hong Kong, a lot of people said to me, how can you afford to take time off work? And
yeah, I'd like to know that.
And it surprised me because a lot of people in the financial industry, financial services, clearly knew about money and how to look after it. But it turns out my wife and I are in a bit of a minority of people who have actually been saving and investing for many, many years, like it was about 20 years at that time. And I was like, why is that? And I think a lot of it came down to my parents. My wife's parents were savers. And so we kind of, even though we had the knowledge, but we had the actions as well. We saw our parents. So my parents retired as soon as I finished university. They were like, right, we've been saving up for 20 years. We're off. So we've done our bit. And so I kind of seen that, and I've seen their life in the sun in Spain. And I'm like, all right, that's what I want. So that's why I saved and invested. So I really wanted this for my children. So I said, all right, I'm going to start teaching my kids about money. So I started coming up with stories and then started to share those stories and getting a really good feedback from parents saying, well, we've never been taught about money ourselves. This is fantastic.
How old were your kids in 2017?
2017, so they would have been 5 and 3. So yeah, so quite young now 7, 9 now. And
I mean, that's fantastic because you've really seen them growing up at the best time, right? And why Vietnam? Why did you move to Vietnam? Hong Kong not a good place to bring up kids?
So whilst we have savings and investments, we couldn't afford to do that in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is the most expensive city in the world. But also we wanted somewhere where it was completely different. We traveled to Vietnam on little holidays. It's only like an hour and 20 minutes from Hong Kong to when we were going on little holidays. And it's just, so I'm overlooking rice paddy fields. The food is absolutely amazing near the beach. It's just very calm, relaxing place because we're not in one of the big cities. We're in this sort of central Vietnam. And so, yeah, we just kind of fell in love with it and could see ourselves doing it. Plus for my kids, they kind of lived, well, my eldest anyway, she's been in sort of London and Hong Kong, so seen this kind of abundance and we wanted to show something a bit different. So coming to Vietnam, which is not relatively less developed, but yeah, people are still happy and looking after each other and everyone has what they need. So
your kids go to a local school then?
Not a local school, no. They go to an international school.
All right.
So it's using the English curriculum because we have plans to move back to the UK for secondary school.
All right.
So I wanted to make sure they had the continuation of that education over that period.
Wow. And tell me, I mean, why is teaching kids about money important?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to, and this research shows this, that children actually pick up many of their money behaviors that they're using as adults by the time they're 7, which kind of shocked me when I first started doing lots of research into this area, because I can't remember talking about money at 7 years old. But children are observing what their parents say, what their parents do, what other people are doing about money, and they can kind of pick up on that. Even if parents aren't sort of actively talking about it, just seeing how they kind of get some money and go and spend it. Or like if children get some pocket money or tooth fairy money and parents say to them, or any adult says to them, what are you going to go and buy with that? Straight away, they're just putting all these connections up. Money is for spending, money is for spending. And so if the longest kind of children grow up just seeing money for spending, then as adults, it's really hard to sort of unwind that sort of brain wiring and change to more of a savings habit or an investing habit or a donating kind of habit. So it's so important that when children are kind of developing their kind of habits, that parents and everyone else can help them understand that money's got different uses. It can be used for spending, which is fun, but it can also be used for saving and growing and donating. And then it just means that when they're adults, they're kind of used to doing these different things rather than, all right, now I need to start saving, but I've had sort of 18 years of just spending.
Why do they pick this up before they're 7? I mean, it's quite interesting because, you know, my children know a little bit about money, a little bit about investing. I've never done a conscious program. And interestingly, before I got interested in this FT Flick charity, I'd been thinking about the subject, and I decided that actually I would set up some form of charity, relieved that I don't have to because the Financial Times is doing it. But I was walking across Hyde Park with my elder boy, who would have been, I don't know, 11 at the time. And I was asking him about, you know, what financial education he got, and he basically said none. And I thought, well, actually, that's really bad. But I hadn't appreciated that kids pick this up at such an early stage. My children have, you know, they get given money by their grandfather or whatever, but
yeah,
they've got no need for money. You know, when I was a kid, when I started going to school on my own, I was given money every day so I could buy some sweets. But yeah. I mean, my children don't have the opportunity to buy some sweets because they're ferried to and from school, and you know, they have a much less independent life in central London from a young age. So how is it that this gets in their heads?
Yeah, so it's all about the habits, and it's not about the knowledge, because again, most of them aren't learning. So it's just about, right, if they just see that money is for spending and money is for spending, that's all they ever see. When they think of money, they're just going to see it as spending. But it's also picking up cues such as, like, some parents might just be flippantly saying, we can't afford that, or money doesn't grow on trees, etc. So children will be going, okay, that means that money is either a bad thing or we're poor, or if money doesn't grow on trees, then where does it come from? And it can get a bit confusing if parents kind of shut down those kind of conversations at a young age. Even if they're not talking directly to the children, if they're just talking amongst themselves as parents, children will pick up on that, and they'll say, if they think it's a negative topic, they won't want to learn about it, they won't see it in a positive light. And then as your behaviors and habits and stuff develop as you get older, they're going to kind of be in line with those kind of negative kind of mindsets. And also, especially if parents are saying, oh, we just don't have enough money for this, then children might think, well, money's a bad thing, or money's we don't have much, therefore we shouldn't be spending as much. And it can just have those little bits are just all getting picked up, and children are just absorbing. But it does show that children who are taught to save a little bit of money from a young age are much more likely to save when they're adults. And again,
it's funny because your perceived wealth or lack of it is a relative thing, isn't it? I mean, you know, my children sort of whining about flying commercial. They don't whine about it, but you know, there are kids at school who are flying in private jets, and you know, my children have never flown a private jet. Does that make them disadvantaged? I don't think so. But money is a very relative phenomenon.
It's incredibly. And what's interesting for our children versus probably us when we were growing up is that there's always going to be this keeping up with the Joneses, and there is this relative, as you mentioned. But when we were kind of growing up, your relative is probably your friends, neighbors, classmates, who are all generally going to be in your same social economical kind of grouping. So it might be that, yeah, you might go economy, but someone might go premium economy. You probably don't know many of your friends are going private jets. Whereas now, though, our children across the world are all comparing themselves to everyone because they just go onto social media and to see other children of the same age. And then so that kind of pressure, experience and views of money and wealth and richness is just exacerbated more than whatever we've kind of grew up with. So that kind of relative piece is much more strong and can have a bigger impact on our children more so than us.
So when I'm at the dinner table and talking about the, an investment I've made or an investment that's gone wrong or an investment that's gone right, I don't talk too much about the ones that go wrong because my wife gets annoyed with me. But, when I say, avocado's gone up a lot, and she says, "Oh, I told you to buy that." Is this a positive thing to talk about companies, businesses, shares? Is that a positive thing that we're subliminally educating the kids? Should this be encouraged?
Oh, yes, I think so. As long as it's always in a positive mindset, even if it's something bad has happened. So in this case, a bad investment, but you put a positive spin on it. So you're kind of showing the kind of learning from it. So, oh, this didn't, but next time I'm going to do that. And the same thing with, so I get other questions from, which is, oh, I'm very bad with money. Therefore, I don't want to talk to my children about money. And I'm like, well, just use this as a catalyst to say, right, you've made a mistake with money. What would you do differently in the future? And then have that conversation with your children. So it's always in a positive mindset. But the more you talk about it, the more they're going to be interested in it and curious and learn from your mistakes. Because kind of the worst thing you want to do is not talk about anything. Get to they get to 18 and then you're like, right, you have no knowledge of money. We've never talked about it. Good luck. And we know what the kind of outcome is going to be. So just having those conversations, and especially about investing. So I talk to my kids, and I have been since for the last couple of years. So since they were like my youngest, sort of 5, just to say, where does money go? And it's just that kind of basic concepts of when we go to the shops, we're going to give some money to a company. So we're getting a little bit poorer. Those companies are going to get a bit richer. Those companies are owned by people. Those people are the investors. And therefore, if you're an investor, you're going to get richer too. It just shows them that money is where money's going, and money can grow over time. And as long as people keep spending, companies at large are going to get more and more wealthy, and those people are going to be investors. So I think it's so powerful. And using individual companies as examples makes it real life. So I use McDonald's with my kids, and then we talked about Disney and Apple. But as they get older and older, you can get a bit more technical about new other companies and ones you might be investing in.
Well, I mean, because I get asked, of course, well, what is it you do, Dad? Because it's obviously slightly weird, and so we've covered that. But what I think is slightly strange is, so when I was walking across the park with my elder boy, he said, "Well, we don't learn about money in school," and I'm going, "Well, hang on a second. You had." This week, you had that afternoon on transgender issues. And last week, you had a seminar on LGBTQ rights and LGBTQ rights. And, they spend all this time on all these woke topics, but nothing, zero on what is a very basic need. Why is financial education so lacking in schools?
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of a number of different points on it. One is that teachers just don't feel empowered to do it. They feel that a lot of them are in debt themselves, and therefore sort of preaching to children about how to be good with money when they're not themselves, and they've never had that training. So you kind of need some kind of experts to go into the school and do that. And luckily there are a growing number of sort of financial advisors, etc., doing kind of almost like pro bono stuff, going to schools and doing, but that's just depends on where you live and if there's a nice sort of person around. So that's one, is just the teachers. One is they saying it's funding for schools, so they need the resources to do that. But the third one is really interesting, is that there's some government people who don't believe that teaching kids about money actually leads to a better outcome, which is crazy, but they just don't have the data. And because and that's the bit. It's not to say they don't really believe, but it's like, unless we see the data, then we can't put lots of money and effort into getting this, which is really kind of sad because it seems so intuitive that teach kids about money, they're more likely to be about money.
Well, I mean, part of the problem, as I perceive it, is, you know, it's parents' responsibility to teach kids about money. It's not the school's responsibility. But if you're a disadvantaged kid from a poorer background, then you're never going to learn. I mean, do you think the time's come for a slight change to share this responsibility so that schools would have part responsibility for this financial education?
100%. Yeah, schools have to do more to reach as many children as possible. And I totally agree that parents can have the biggest influence. So in terms of, if you had to choose one, parents or schools, I'd say parents. But again, schools need to do that because there's going to be those children who don't have parents or don't have parents who are going to be in a position to provide any help, even if they have the resources, such as some of my stuff that I produce, for example. But yeah, we need in tandem. But the key thing about the difference between parents and schools, and this is a really important piece, and it might go back to a little bit of why some of the government people think that it's not worth it, is that there's financial knowledge and then there's financial actions or behaviors. And so schools can do a very, very good job of saying, right, what is investments, what is savings, what is debts, what is tax. But does that lead to actions? And it's actually the actions that we take that determine our financial futures. So you have one student who's read every single money book there is, and you've got one that just hasn't read any of them, but just religiously just saves a little bit of money. I'd go for the one that religiously saves every money as the one that's going to have a better financial outcome. But that's the link, and that's why you need kind of parents to be involved. Even if you give them the knowledge, you need the parents to sort of help them put that into action. So giving them, if they can afford to do so, giving them a little bit of pocket money, setting up a bank account, set up an investment account, so they can start taking these kind of little actions and making mistakes and learning from them as they kind of grow up.
And of course, I mean, what people are going to say watching this, they're going to say, well, it's all very well for you, middle class, wealthy people. I mean, you know, lots of people just don't have enough money to save. I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, so I think especially if we're talking about the children here, I think that's, so one of the bits of the book that I've written and some of the characters in there essentially start like that. And what we need to do is make sure they understand that there are certain rules to become good with money. And if you follow those, even if you don't have money now, when you do get the opportunity to earn some money, if you look after that money, then you can grow and grow over time. And there's this kind of famous story of the janitor in the US who just did that. He didn't ever earn much money, but retired or died actually a multi-millionaire because he just formed good habits over a long, long time.
Yeah,
and so
the power of the stock market. Yeah, and he obviously picked some good stocks.
Yeah, no, they compound interest and etc. But it shows that in that case, he didn't earn very much. He didn't have a very high education, but he followed some very simple principles and did those over a long period of time. Whereas what we're seeing generally is people, you say like the wealthy middle class, but most of them are not following these rules and cannot retire until they're 65 and they've got their pension, and miss out on opportunities because they're spending so much. So I think it's more about, yeah. So it's more about saying to people who don't have much that you might not have much now, but in the future, when you do start earning and look after it, you can have some in the future. And just having that sort of positive mindset was going to change that, and they're more likely to follow those actions, and it's those actions that are going to determine their financial future.
It's funny. I mean, I would love to have this conversation with, I think the chap's name was Brian, if I remember correctly. So I used to work for a merchant bank in London called Fleming's. Oh, yeah. And Fleming's was a very old Scottish institution. And to reinforce its sort of heritage, they had a butler on every floor. So when you came to the third floor to the research department, I think his name was Brian. Brian, the butler, would greet you. And he was a lovely guy. And, you know, he was dressed in, you know, pinstripe trousers and all that. And I used to chat to him. And Brian obviously didn't get paid very much. I mean, you know, the Fleming's was not known as a generous payer. And if you were the butler, you certainly wouldn't get well paid. But Brian used to buy some stock every month. And Fleming's unusual because although it was a private family-owned company, there was a pool of shares that were reserved for employees, and you could buy shares. There was an internal market once a month, and I used to buy quite a lot of shares because I thought that the thing was quite cheap, and I thought eventually the family would sell out because that was the long-term trend. And indeed, that's what happened. And I made a significant amount of money, but Brian made, relative to his wealth and to his income, made a huge amount of money. And it was all that, just that very simple philosophy. Here's an opportunity to invest in the business. And, it's a low risk, safe investment because the family are obviously going to preserve their own wealth. And, it was in a sector which was consolidating. And that's a kind of a good lesson. Of course, not everybody would have the opportunity to buy shares in the business that they work for. And, many people would say you shouldn't do that because you've got enough risk as it stands. But that's a good sort of example, I think, I should give my children. But one question for you. I mean, one of the things I think that frustrates me about finance, and, I'm in the financial education business, and in a way, it helps me that everything is super complicated. And, there's this huge cloud of jargon and nonsense that it seems is almost deliberately imposed so that advisors can charge fees. Now, that's maybe an overly cynical attitude. There's a lot of regulatory sanctions imposed, a lot of regulations imposed on companies who operate in finance. So they kind of got to warn you that shares can go up as well as down, or down as well as up. What is the role of financial institutions in educating our children?
So that's a really interesting one. So the good thing is there are more companies, institutions, banks, etc., starting to provide financial education. And trying to make it a little bit more separate to them, because clearly there's a lot of people who are just very reserved about it, or believe there's massive conflicts of interest. Like they're like, well, you're just trying to get our children to open a bank account with you or an investment account with you so you can make money. So hopefully that's not true, but I'm guessing there's going to be cases of that. But the more that they can start investing in just providing the basics for children. So I just believe that when anyone opens a junior ISA account, for example, there should be some kind of, don't just open this for your children on their behalf and don't tell them. Make sure you tell them what's going on, and here's some resources to help you educate your children about what these investments are. Because if a child has a junior ISA, especially a stocks and shares one, and they can't touch it, and they've got those many years, that's fantastic, because as we know, most people when they're investing, they take too much action and lose a lot of money from it. Whereas these children have got these accounts and they can't take any action, so they're just going to see the market go up and down, and they've got, by the time they get to 18 and get control of this money, they would have seen, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 market crashes and seen that the market recovers after those. So when they're adults, they're going to be so much more empowered than the regular adults who start investing for themselves, have the first market crash and go take too much actions. So I believe that having, not just providing the tools and the products, but providing the education, especially for the younger ones, is going to just give them such an advantage in life. But they're always thinking about what's the incentive for them, and that's one of the bits. You've only got a certain amount of resources. So if you're a financial advisor, you've got so much resources. Where are you going to best place them? Are you going to place them in with the children, where if they start investing, it's only going to be 100 quid, maybe £1,000, maybe a couple of thousand? Or do you put it in your resources in trying to get your current clients who have got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe, to do more in terms of insurance? So they're clearly going to spend most of their time, resources, money on their current clients, and therefore it's just that, what's the incentive? But I'm hoping that people are now seeing that the long-term benefits of getting children to understand and have money. So there's no point in having a financial industry, financial advisory industry in the future if all the children grow up spending their money and don't have any.
No, sure.
I
I mean, there's a fabulous fintech opportunity there to do a dedicated kids product, savings product. Can't understand why people don't, look at things like that. But you should do that. Yeah, you should have the kids ISA and white label it from one of the banks. Or I mean, have you spoken to the banks about them giving kids your book when they open an ISA?
That's definitely on my to-do list, to try and get to find the right people within the banks, because I think, yeah, I honestly believe that if children read the book and have an ISA together, or either stocks and shares or even a cash ISA, by the time they've read the book, they'll want the stocks and shares ISA. Would be fantastic. And of course, I know so many people who are saving for their children but not telling their children about it, and it's just such a missed opportunity. And children get to 18, they don't have the knowledge, they feel like lottery winners, and we all know how good lottery winners are with their money, whereas if they learn about, see about it, plan for what they're going to do with that money from years in advance, they're much more likely to look after it.
Well, I wish you luck with that. I've been doing a program trying to persuade banks to give their employees my book, and I thought we had a very slick marketing campaign, and I send a box to the executive in the bank with an explanation of what I do and what I am, and there's a little gift inside, and there's the book, and there's a brochure, and hasn't been well. I have had some responses so far, but I persuaded the publisher that this would be a good idea, and so I've got huge number of boxes ordered, because to order 100, 200 or 400, it makes almost no difference in price. It's really complicated tooling to create all the box and all the inserts, and then to actually build it was quite funny. But definitely they should consider that. So listen, I mean, it's been a great pleasure and very interesting talking to you. I've certainly learned something that I should be doing differently at home. The good news is that the kids now have a sort of kids credit card, and they've now got accounts, and they've been talking about what they're going to do with the money, what they want to save up for. The slight problem is, of course, that whenever they want anything, they seem to get it. So there's not that thing that I had when I was a kid, but I think that was partly reflection of philosophy being different when we were children, because my parents wouldn't have bought something on credit. It would have been anathema to them. They could have, but older generations tended to think, okay, well, if I want to buy a washing machine or a car, I've got to save up the deposit for the car. The cars were generally financed, but a washing machine you would save up for. And I think today's society obviously very different, because you buy now, pay later, and our children see that philosophy. So I just wonder, I mean, just in closing, what advice would you give to all the parents watching this? What should they do? Are there three things they should do?
Yeah, so I think the first one is to get your children in the habit of saving. And it sounds very, very simple, but every time they get some money, just get them to save 10, 20% of that. It doesn't matter how small. So if you even got young children and you only get £1, get them to save that 10, 20p and put it aside, just because that's the actions. And if they do that every single time, they'll see the little bits add up, but also as they get older and get more money and they take that, clearly that's going to compound. So when they're adults and they've got savings and people say, where'd you get those savings from? They'll be like, oh, it's just what I've always done. And it then starts them to be in a different path to not having to use debt or buy now, pay later, because they've got savings. They're going to have that security. They've got that foundation to start investing. And as we know, when you start investing and you start to see your money grow over a long time, you're more likely to want to keep investing. Like pretty much everyone I've ever met who does invest says, I wish I started investing earlier. And so if you can start that, so my first one is to get them to save. Second is to get them to start opening an investment account for them, get compound interest working for them ASAP. And the third one is to teach your children to be patient. And it sounds really sort of simple, but if my view is that patience is the superpower of the wealthy, both in terms of investing, because clearly you have to wait, but also in terms of you're less likely to use debt because you'll just wait, like you're talking about parents saving up for the washing machines. So patience, less likely to get scammed, less likely to gamble. And it's all about patience. So teaching your children, so I use the example of a chocolate bar. Every time my kids get a chocolate bar, I get them to save just one little piece for tomorrow. And then I get them to, I give another little bit, I'll give them an extra bit of my chocolate or something like that. So it's in the fridge. So they see that being patient gives them a little reward. Clearly, when they're children, you can't say, oh, you're going to get your reward in a year or 2 years, 5 years, but you start off by sort of days, and as they get older, weeks, months, and just show that and if they grow up patient, then yeah, they're going to avoid so many of the keeping up with the Joneses, the instant gratification piece that we got there. So
I was going to ask you, okay, so how do you teach your kids to be patient? I mean, I've got one child who's particularly impatient. I'm not sure that I'll be able to persuade my younger boy that he should save a piece of his chocolate bar, because they're usually consumed very rapidly. In fact, both kids will consume a donut in a rate of knots. Any other advice on patience? Any other tips that you use? Tricks?
Yes, I think the key one is to keep it small. I think this is so I say on that chocolate bar, but you can do that whether it's the other one is to do the sort of budgeting. So we used to do it with our kids with screen time. So we used to give them a budget and say, right, you can have this many hours over the week to watch your TV. And so initially, as you'd expect, them to just go in there and do straight away, watch all of it in the first day, and then would then whinge at us for a whole week. But we're strong. We said, no, you've used it. go and play with toys, read a book. But then they learned to be patient. They learned to spread it out over time. And now we don't even do the budgeting thing. They've kind of got into a nice routine, and they know that if they started watching too much too early, that they would go back to the system.
Well, I must say, I'm in awe of your skills as a parent. I'm obviously pretty pathetic in that department because there isn't a screen time budget in my household, although I have tried to introduce it, but without any success. But Will, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed talking to you. That's some really, really helpful, valuable advice. Before we go, do you want to just tell the viewers about your book and where people can find you?
Sure. So I've got a book called Grandpa's Fortune Fables. So it's written for children sort of 7 to 13 in terms of reading age, but great for parents to read with their young kids. It's kind of 14 chapters of Grandpa sort of going on these adventures, and then his granddaughter sort of saying, what does that link to money? So it teaches about earning money, saving money, investing money, how to keep hold of the money, so not using debt, scams, gambling. So it's kind of different from any other book that I've seen out there, and parents are loving it just as much. So yeah, Grandpa's Fortune Fables available on Amazon. But if people do want to buy multiple copies, so if they're financial advisors or buying for birthday parties or friends, then come to my website. I can do bulk orders at a discount. And then my website is bluetreesavings.com.
Oh, we'll put that in the show notes. Well, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I really enjoyed my conversation with Will Rainey. I learned a lot. It's a bit worrying that your kids can learn about money from the kitchen table before the age of 7. I'm not sure whether I totally agree with that or not, but I mean, he's done the research. I certainly learned that I should pay more attention, and even for me, I'm a financial professional, should spend more time educating my children about money and about how to save. I thought the comment that he made about getting the kids to save a piece of their chocolate bar and keep it for tomorrow, absolutely amazing. I'm very pleased to be supporting the Financial Times financial literacy and inclusion campaign. I think it's a great cause, and it's something we should all be supporting, because yeah, we should be doing this stuff at home for our own children, but it's the least privileged in society that need this the most. It's the underprivileged people that end up borrowing money on credit cards and not realizing how much they pay. It's the underprivileged who end up getting scammed with payday loans and all the rest of it. Watch this quick video.
How much does the average house in London cost to buy?
Probably about £1 million.
Ooh, pretty expensive.
The average house in London should cost around 400,000.
I don't really have a clue.
Financial literacy, basically the building block for knowledge about finance, is a key area that we think our readers, the FT, identify with, and that the public in general absolutely needs to master in order not to be ripped off in the world. I have plenty of friends and family who got into financial trouble, and a lot of the time it is to do with, frankly, not having enough money, but a lot of the time it is also to do with not understanding some of the basic principles of finance.
I told you about this, but we're setting up a charity at the FT. It's called FLIC, the Financial Literacy and Inclusion Campaign.
Great.
Which is Normal people I know as an FT columnist are bewildered by much of the products and choices, the options that they have. They just don't feel equipped to make those choices. And part of our campaign will be getting the industry to recognise that and be much clearer with the information that it gives consumers so that we can make fairer and justified choices.
I think I'm incredibly lucky. From a very young age, my parents were taking me to the supermarket and teaching me how to count pennies and figure out the best way of buying different items, teaching me the value of saving. All those things have been really important to me and have really taken away a lot of stress in my life because I felt comfortable about understanding that.
The decisions that we make around money really matter, and we make those decisions right through our life. And those decisions really have an impact on how we thrive in life. So you need education and you need the confidence to be able to get the decisions and make decisions and choices that are right for you.
FT Flick is going to focus its work on 3 strands. The first will be producing high quality educational content. Secondly, we're going to lobby at the highest level, that's with government, and to make sure that consumers are getting the very best possible service from financial services providers. Thirdly, we want to make sure that our work is grounded in academic research, making sure that we're filling in the gaps about financial literacy and tailoring our work as best that we can.
We have put together a board that, among the FT representatives on that board, the 5 people who are there, all bring great expertise in their specific area. Externally, we've managed to bring in a couple of educators, one of whom has actually run a financial literacy campaign elsewhere in the world, and also a couple of big city names who bring that kind of contact base of potential backers, as well as a real understanding of finance.
So FT Flick will be primarily working with 3 main constituencies. So that's young people, women, and what we're calling marginalised community, which we do know is a broad church. We do appreciate that those 3 groups are not discrete categories, and we'll be targeting our work at the intersections of those groups.
A lot of data and a lot of studies and a lot of surveys do show that women say they just don't have access to really helpful, easy to understand financial education and tools to help them manage their money better.
And the truth is, it's a really difficult thing because you're not only tackling jargon, complexity, you're tackling behavioural issues as well. And so trying to get that mix of how to address those issues for different segments is a really complex thing to do, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
When working with marginalised communities, it's clear that we do need to have some precautionary content that explains the pitfalls of debt and so on, but people are ever more entrepreneurial with side hustles and being self-employed in addition to their day jobs, and it's really important that we're able to support them with that, as well as instilling in people the joy of investment and the opportunities that exist for their money to grow.
So, I'm sure that you've all seen this before, the Euro Millions, part of the National Lottery.
One of the things that we've done is go to Manchester and deliver a workshop for the lovely students of NEA Central School.
I was really encouraged that money was a topic that they all wanted to talk about, but they also had this huge thirst for knowledge. They wanted to know about whether property was a good investment for the future. They wanted to know about cryptocurrencies, and the fact that 14 and 50-year-old people in school are thinking these kinds of questions just shows to me that it really needs to be on the curriculum of every school across the world in a big way.
One of our sort of values and one of our core principles is to try to give students the opportunity to leave our school and go and meet every citizen as an equal. Within that subject and within that subject area, we would really like to develop our own sort of understanding and our own ability to speak about financial risk and to teach students about financial literacy more generally. Opportunities like this for experts in the field to come and give sort of expert knowledge and pass on expert understanding to students, I think is hugely valuable.
Obviously, our campaign is going to be targeted at certain stratas of society, those who are in need of financial education, but we also need help from people who feel they can assist with our campaign and, crucially, donating money.
It's equally important that we're able to tap into the networks of our supporters, and we know that there's a great deal of talent there, so people are able to volunteer their time, and we would encourage them to get in touch to do so.
And if you can't give us any of those things, then just give us your support. Spread the word about what we're trying to achieve and why, and make sure that the Flick campaign is heard in the corridors of power.
So that was, I thought, a really fantastic video explaining what the FT Flick campaign is about. I urge you, please, to support it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned something, I hope you've taken something away. If you like what we're doing, visit the website behindthebalancesheet.com. We've got lots of free educational material for people who are interested in investing. We've got some paid courses, and you can always sign up for our excellent free newsletter. And don't forget, check out the podcast. The podcast is available on all platforms where you get your podcasts. And if you enjoy it, don't forget, leave a nice review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, ft.com/flick. Throw them a little bit of money. Thank you.